Well, this is Don Byram. I'm here with Glenn Johnson. This is the Live Fit Podcast, episode 135. Oh, my goodness. We made it 135, folks. This is Be a Never Binge Again coach, and I'm listening to it right now.
It turned out that it worked for a lot of other people. I thought it was just a weird method that would only work for me. I kept it really private. But it turned out that it worked for a lot of other people, and now we actually train and license other people to do it if they want to. You can't love yourself thin because the part of the brain that responds to food addiction is the part that doesn't really know love. It's the reptilian brain, and it knows fight or flight. It knows eat, mate, or kill. It doesn't know love.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Today's guest is Dr. Glenn Livingston. He is the author of the wildly successful book, Never Binge Again. Today, he's going to share with us a little bit about how his method works to break many addictions, especially binge eating, and how you can learn this method to use it on yourself or get paid to help others. And speaking of helping others, I want to help you. To do so, I've created a 3-question survey to give you a chance to tell me what you really want, how I can help you. What can I give? What can I share? What sort of topics do you want me to cover on the podcast or in my articles? Do you want programs? Do you want, any sort of systems or guidance or more coaching? You name it, just tell me what's on your mind, what's eating you, what I can help you with. I'm not saying I will for sure deliver, but I will definitely do my best. To take this survey, simply go to livefitsurvey.com. It's a really super easy URL to remember, livefitsurvey.com. There you go. It's as easy as that. Now, let's hear from my good friend, Glenn. Hey, Glenn, how you doing?
I'm doing super well. Looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, me too. You know, you've been telling me for a while now about this coaching business that you have where you have coaches working with people to help them not binge and not overeat. Am I getting this right?
You're getting that right. There's a little more to it than that, but that's essentially what we do. Our goal is to help 1 million people a year to stop overeating.
Okay, well, fill in the blanks. What I left out.
Well, I wrote a weird book about the way that I stopped overeating, which had to do with exposing a lot of the mythology and the culture that prevents a lot of people from losing weight, and paying attention to the way our neurology is set up rather than a lot of the thoughts about loving yourself thin and it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you, and you've got a chronic progressive mysterious disease or something like that, and looking at what was happening in the food industry. And I kept a journal for a lot of years, and then I published it on a lark, and it took off, and we've got over 500,000 readers at this point. And it turned out that it worked for a lot of other people. I thought it was just a weird method that would only work for me. I kept it really private. But it turned out that it worked for a lot of other people, and now we actually train and license other people to do it if they want to. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about what all that mythology was in the culture and how you can overcome it and how it's helping people, and then give people a little information if they wanted to either apply it for their own eating or think about applying it for their clients and patients and anybody they might otherwise want to work with.
Well, you said it. There's a little more to it than what I gave. So, what is the kind of the framework of this unusual method you use? Okay.
I spent 30 years trying to love myself thin because I came from a family of psychologists, 17 psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors, social workers. Yeah. Feel bad for me, man. Go ahead and feel bad for me.
That's a lot of shrinkage.
So when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I looked at every way I could possibly think of to figure out what was eating me. Because one of the first myths is that it's not what you're eating, It's what's eating you. And if you could fill that empty hole in your heart, that you'd wind up stop overeating. But it didn't work for me. I had a very soulful journey. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what food means to people along the way. But my eating got worse and worse and worse. Not in a straight line, but a little better than a lot worse, a little better than a lot worse. And eventually I realized that the problem was that you can't love yourself thin because the part of the brain that responds to food addiction is the part that doesn't really know love. It's the reptilian brain. And it knows fight or flight. It knows eat, mate, or kill. It doesn't know love. And love lives in a totally different part of the brain. Lives in the, part where our memories and relationships and ability to delay gratification is stored. The upper part of the brain where everything that we value as human beings is stored. And at the same time, the food industry is spending so much money to engineer these food-like substances. And we've talked about this before, the hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and cytotoxins. Yep. And then all the money that goes into packaging and advertising, and then the addiction treatment industry saying that, this is a disease, you can't stop even if you want to. The best you can do is abstain one day at a time, and you got to go to all these meetings that have sponsors and kind of act like a dependent little child. You have all of that mythology circling around, and it's a wonder that anybody can ever stop overeating. So I figured out that I had to separate my reptilian brain from my human identity. And I decided that my reptilian brain was going to be my inner pig, and that I would draw very clear lines in the sand. So, for example, I will never have bread during the week again. And if I heard my inner pig squealing for bread during the week, I'd say, well, bread is pig slop. My pig wants that. I don't listen to pig squeals. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And
You said you made your reptilian brain, you kind of represented it as a pig. Why not a lizard or a snake or some reptile?
Yeah, I could have. I could have.
But a pig's a little more revolting and a little more obvious because they tend to pig out on slop?
Yeah, I never intended to publish this. This was just going to be something I did privately. And I wish that I didn't use the word pig, because there are a lot of women that were called pigs as a child.
Oh,
and they're sensitive to it.
Yeah.
But so I tell people they can use food monster or food demon or anything they want to, as long as they don't think of it as a cuddly little child. This is not a pet. This is an aggressive program of ruthless domination. This is like deciding you're the alpha wolf and your lower brain is challenging for leadership of the pack. And if you think of what an alpha wolf does when it's challenged for leadership, it snarls at the challenger and basically says, get back in line or I'll kill you. Right? That's the attitude. So what I discovered was it was that attitude that I had to cultivate, which gave me my control back. It would wake me up at that moment of impulse and give me those extra microseconds to remember who I was and be able to make the right decision. So that's it in a nutshell, Glenn. And I recovered not immediately. It took a little while, but I kept experimenting, and that same technique just provided more and more time, and I started to feel confident and have more power and play with different rules. And, I lost about 60 pounds, 65 pounds, and my triglycerides came way down, and the doctor stopped yelling at me for everything.
Nice.
And yeah, that's what happened.
Nice. Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned about the myths. And I know you've said this to me before, so I'd like to bring this out. You have talked about the common myths in addiction. What are those? And maybe dispel them.
Well, one of them is the idea that we should always be aiming for progress and not perfection. And see, there's actually something to this. This is not a total lie. It's more like a half-truth. When you make a mistake, then retrospectively having the attitude about progress and not perfection is the right attitude. If an Olympic archer misses the bullseye, they don't throw down their arrows or shoot them all into the air or into the audience and say, I'm a pathetic archer.
Right.
They wake up and they kind of say, what did I do wrong? How do I aim again? And I'm just going to get up and aim at the bullseye one more time because I'm making progress. But when they aim at the target to start with, they're actually committing with perfection. They see the arrow going into the target before they let go of the arrow, before they let go of the bow. Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Great analogy or visualization. I can completely picture that. I get what you're saying completely. And I've used the progress, not perfection thing. I don't necessarily say to people to aim for progress, but if they come and tell me something like, oh, I didn't meet my goal or whatever it was, I say, okay, well, what did you do? And I say, okay, great, you made some progress. Now what are you looking at next?
Well, see, that's the place to use progress, not perfection, retrospectively after a mistake. But when you're making a commitment, the nature of a commitment is perfection. When you got married, you did not tell your wife, gee, honey, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to sleep with anybody else, but there sure are a lot of attractive people out there. And how about progress, not perfection? We'll just do the best we can.
I'll try not to. Yeah. No, you're right. And so I was laughing. I got an idea of where you were going with that.
So the phrase that I like is commit with perfection, but forgive yourself with dignity.
Ah, very nice.
Yeah. And it turns out that when your lizard brain or your pig or your food demon catches you in a mistake, it actually tries to do the opposite. It tries to analyze the mistake as if because you're not perfect, you must be nothing, and to wear you down so that you feel too weak to resist the next binge. And then when you're setting out towards a goal, it'll give you the wrong idea and tell you to pursue progress instead of perfection. But it's the opposite. Commit with perfection, forgive yourself with dignity.
Very nice. What's the next one?
Well, the next one is the idea that we should be using guidelines and not rules. So, for example, just eat well 90% of the time and indulge the other 10%. And the problem with this is that it wears down your willpower. See, if I say I'm going to avoid bread 90% of the time and eat it 10% of the time, whenever I go out to a restaurant, I have to make another decision. Is this part of the 10% or part of the 90%? And I don't have any real hard and fast rules that help me to make that decision. And all the research on willpower shows that it's a fatigable muscle, which means it's like gas in the tank. There's only so much that we can burn before we can't make any more good decisions that day. Right. This is why people eat badly at night.
Yep. But
if I made a rule that said I will only have bread 1 meal per calendar week, which is that's not even 9, that's like 5% of the time, maybe 2 meals per calendar week would be 90% of the time. If I'm only going to have bread 2 meals per calendar week, well, and only on Saturday and Sunday, then most of my decisions about bread have been made for the whole week, and I don't have to wear down my willpower. I'm just the kind of person who doesn't eat bread during the week.
Right. So you don't have to worry about making a decision. Should I, shouldn't I? Oh, I shouldn't, but I really want it. Nope, it's not Saturday. You can't have it.
Right. And what you're really doing is building character with these types of rules. Rules dictate habitual ways of responding in the face of temptation. Another word for that is character. And I think I talked about the analogy in the diner before. Do you want me to say that again?
Yeah, please do.
Well, if you walk into a diner and there's a $10 bill on the table because the waitress didn't see her tip, and she says, I'll be right back, I just got to get you a menu. And she walks away and there's nobody up front and there's no video camera and there are no windows. Nobody would see you take the $10 bill. Virtually nobody that I ask this question to says they would take it. And I say, why? Wouldn't that require a lot of willpower? And they say, no willpower at all. I say, why? It's because I'm not a thief, right? So as a matter of character, they have predetermined how they behave in that tempting situation, no matter what. And that's what happens when you create very specific rules they eventually seep into your character and you don't even have to think about them. It's just no longer an option to behave otherwise.
Gotcha.
Whereas, yeah.
All right. And so that was 3. So number 1, it's not what you're eating. It's what's eating you. 2, aim for progress, not perfection. And these are myths. Let me reiterate. The 3rd myth is use guidelines, not rules. How about the 4th?
The 4th one has to do with cultivating fear of food. So sometimes people who say they're addicted to food are told to try to avoid being exposed to the stimulus. So you shouldn't walk past a bakery, or you shouldn't breathe in if you happen to be in a restaurant and it has tempting smells, or you shouldn't look at pictures of fast food online. And while it's not necessarily a good idea to purposely and consciously seek out stimuli for things that you're not going to have, because why do you want to torture yourself?
Right.
It's also not necessary to fear it. And I prefer that people cultivate confidence, because the way that our neurology is set up, we have the ability to resist any temptation. We do. And that's why you'll find it in every major religion. They'll tell you that God has given you the ability to resist any major temptation.
Yeah. And the religions expect people to behave well for God. They don't expect God to take away the temptation from them. And you can't really avoid temptation in our society. You walk out of McDonald's, there's another McDonald's across the street. You can't. You can't avoid that. You can't walk into any store without seeing potato chips and cookies and all sorts of delicious things. And so I think we need to be cultivating confidence and not fear. I think we need to be able to look at these things straight on and know that we are able to win. We can take care of ourselves with it. So cultivate confidence as opposed to fear. That's the truth. Cultivate fear and avoid exposure to the addictive stimuli. That's a myth, or at least a half myth. All right. And let's see. That was 4, avoid exposure to addictive stimuli. What about number 5? That's your last one, correct?
Yeah. It's the idea that we shouldn't feel any guilt or shame for making a mistake. And I think that's a problem. I'm in favor of letting go of excessive guilt and shame. But just like pain has a function in the body, if there are disorders where children don't feel pain, and those kids rarely live past 5 years old.
Right.
Psychological pain in the form of guilt and shame serves the function of waking you up and telling you to pay attention. Now, once you've paid attention and you've analyzed the mistake that you've made and you figure out how you're not going to do it again, then focusing on the guilt and the shame is actually a pig's game. It's pathological, and it doesn't help you at all. It just makes you feel too weak to resist the next binge. So I always say when you touch a hot stove, you want to feel that pain for a second, but you don't want to say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher and I might as well just put my whole hand down on the stove.
Yeah. Good point. And yet we don't translate those types of things into real life.
There's actually one more, Glenn, and that's the idea that there's a myth that says addiction is a disease and people are powerless to resist it on their own.
I've always had a problem with that.
Tell me why.
And maybe I'm naive in my assumption of what a disease actually is, but I I don't know that I could explain it to you in an eloquent way, but to me a disease is I don't know, hepatitis or cancer or some of these other things that come on to a person by either some sort of conduction, you touch something or a malfunction in the body. And addictions, it seems like I don't believe that they're completely genetic. I think that, maybe there's a genetic trait that makes a person, maybe it's easier for them to become addicted, just like there's genetic traits for people to be tall or to be athletic. And speaking of on that, athletics, you might have a good genetic trait for being really good at a certain athletic sport or whatever it might be. But if you don't train it, you're not going to get very good at it at all. And that might be the same with alcoholism. If you don't train to become an alcoholic, you don't become one.
I guess what I'm trying to say is if a person is left untreated, if they have a true disease, that disease will get worse. If you have pneumonia and you don't treat it, it gets worse. If you have cancer and you don't treat it, it gets worse. But if you are an alcoholic and you don't drink, you don't show those alcoholic tendencies or the behaviors that are causing the problems in a person's life. So left untreated, alcoholism improves. Left untreated, a disease worsens.
Yeah. And even to the extent that there are hereditary factors, there's a statistical concept called percent of variance accounted for, which it is what it sounds like. What percent of the differences in alcoholism can be explained by people with alcoholic parents or not? And those percent of variances are usually fairly small. So even if it's 20%, that means that there's 80% of additional factors that could be influenced in the environment and choices the individual makes to avoid the addiction. And you're right, it's a self-acquired state which isn't transmissible, contagious, it's not autoimmune, it's largely not hereditary. There's some hereditary influence, and it's not really degenerative or traumatic either. So I don't really think that there is evidence that it's a disease. There's a study that's often quoted which looks at the differences in the brains between addicts and non-addicts. And there are differences. But what that really demonstrates is that the brain adapts to the substances that you expose it to. So when you expose people who like hamburgers to a lot of hamburgers, then the areas of the brain that light up an addiction, they tend to light up when they see a hamburger. But really interestingly, if you look at taxi drivers versus non-taxi drivers in the population, a taxi driver who sees a taxi or sees a picture of a taxi, that area of his brain lights up more so than people who aren't taxi drivers. Are we going to say that that person is a compulsive taxi driver? They've got a taxi driving disease. It's just it's just evidence that the brain responds to learn. It's neuroplasticity, that what fires together wires together, and you're looking at the after effects, not the cause.
You know, I had Dr. Joel Furman on my show a while back
On episode 95.
He said that he is firmly convinced that addictions begin in childhood with the consumption of large amounts of sugar.
Well, I do believe that these foods are addictive. They're engineered to find your bliss point without giving you the nutrition necessary to feel satisfied, and therefore you want more and more and more. So they're designed to override your full button. They're designed to override your best sense of judgment. But that doesn't mean that you can't say no or define exactly how much you're going to have if you think it through first. It just means that it's harder. It just means that evolution didn't prepare us for that depth of a level of pleasure. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We have not had big, massive amounts of sugar available for the eons that humans have been alive, only within the last 100 years, really. And now when we eat that sugar, it's lighting up that pleasure center of the brain. And then as we become older, we might find other things that do the same thing. And we might like those other things for other reasons as well. And then we keep using them. And of course, there's that whole dopamine release, and it just perpetuates itself.
Yeah. So these foods really are pleasure buttons that we weren't prepared for. It does get harder to stop when you start to eating them, when you start having them. But that doesn't mean that you are addicted beyond the ability to choose. And I've found this repeatedly, that people who think that they've got no power, we work with them a little bit and they seem to have power again. So there's a good book called Addiction is a Choice that reviews a lot of the evidence for this.
Oh, no kidding.
But I think it's dangerous to say that addiction is a disease, because people then start to believe that they're powerless and they feel hopeless, and they think that if they don't spend their lives in these programs, that they've got no hope, and they start to despair.
Yeah, and one of the things that people really love to hear is that it's not their fault.
Yeah, because then they can avoid the guilt and the shame.
And by saying what I'm saying, I don't mean that you're a bad person, but everybody has a certain amount of control over their lives.
It's the price that you pay for saying that it's not your fault. And to a certain extent, it's not your fault. It's the food industry's and the advertising industry and the addiction treatment industry's fault. But by saying you have no control, that you're powerless to do anything about it, or that you have a disease, you're abdicating your freedom and responsibility. And you're really eliminating your ability to be an adult in the world in a whole bunch of different ways. And so I would prefer to deal with a little bit of guilt and shame, because I know the clear line for when I'm supposed to let that go, than to give up my freedom. It's too big a price to pay to walk away from that freedom just so I never feel guilty or ashamed.
Yeah, true.
And by the way, there's nothing that anybody has done who's listening to this with food that I haven't done. There's nothing you have to, if I can get up on the radio as a doctor, as a psychologist, as a sophisticated psychologist, and say, I've eaten out of the garbage, I've eaten off the floor, I've eaten all my roommates' food without telling them, I've gone to 7 fast food restaurants in an hour so that nobody would know how much I was eating. There's nothing you guys are doing with food that I haven't done, that loads of other people haven't done. So you don't really have to walk around with that kind of shame on your face. It's let's just figure out what it means to you to eat healthy, make really clear rules that really define the lines, and then listen very carefully for what your food demon or your inner food monster or saboteur is saying to get you to break your own rules.
Well, thanks for all that clarification on the myths, Glenn. I definitely agree with you. It's fascinating. Addictions are fascinating, and this is one side of it that we don't really hear a lot of. Now, I brought you on here because you have a business where you have coaches that help people not binge eat anymore. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it started because I was coaching people. I mean, first I fixed this for myself, and then I wrote the book, and then I had hundreds of thousands of readers, and people were asking me, can I coach them? And so I started recording a whole bunch of free sessions so that people could see how to do it without having to pay me necessarily, because I wasn't sure that I wanted to make this into a business, and I just wanted to help a lot of people. And so I actually have hundreds of free sessions recorded, and I'll tell you where to get all those in a minute. But, then I was overwhelmed with people. I couldn't coach as many people as were wanting coaching every month. And so I trained 3 people how to do it really well. And they were getting almost as good as results as I was. And so then I started selling it as a program, and that was working out well. And then I had all these people who were saying, gee, this saved my life. I lost so much weight, or I just stopped obsessing about food. And can you teach me how to do this with other people? And I actually have a background in training personal coaches. I'm a psychologist, and I did a lot of coaching in my past, and I ran a coach training organization, so I knew exactly how to do that. So I set up another coach training organization very specific for this type of coaching. And what that is, it's different than a lot of these coach training places that you go to, in as much as it's not just a course that you take and take a test or something like that. There is a course, there are 8 lectures, but the more important piece of it is we've set up a supervision community, because I really want you to succeed. And so you come in and you can do the 8 lectures at your own pace. But what I really want you to do is do the practices and come into the supervisions. And there are 5 supervisions per week that you can come to. They're all optional. So you come when you can and skip it when you can't. And you can learn from me or my master coaches or even my partner talk about marketing your coaching practice. And those are all for an hour. And so we really have a community for 5 hours a week that you come to whenever you want to and get support. And you get to do that for up to 2 years after your date of purchase. So that extends usually way beyond when people graduate and are starting to work with real clients and market themselves. And then on top of that, what I didn't like about the last coach training organization I had was that I felt like I was successfully training the coaches how to do it, but they couldn't get clients. So this time I worked really hard, because you know that I've sold $30 million of marketing consulting to large companies, and I'm fairly expert at marketing. So my partner and I worked really hard to develop presentations that were actually selling. We developed a website for people that was working. We developed networking scripts that were working. We developed Facebook approaches that were working, and we're always testing them and trying to improve them. And you get all that when you graduate, so that you've got these marketing tools that are tested and proven already to go out and get clients when you're ready. And then one of the sessions, actually the session on Sunday mornings, is a marketing supervision. So that's very specifically for people to come and say, hey, I went to this networking event, or I did this presentation, or I sat with a client and tried to sell them on the first package and I couldn't do it, and what happened. And so we're supervising you with the marketing too. So it's a very, very comprehensive level of support for 2 years after you purchase. And you can read about that well, Glenn, I'll let you give them the URL later on. And that's what we do. So we've got a direct coaching program, we've got a coach training and licensing program, and then we're also about to launch a way to use this type of neurology to cement in your positive thinking program soon. And Glenn will tell you where to go to learn more about all that. And if you have any questions, you can ask on the website.
So in short, you coach people to not binge eat. You coach coaches to learn how to coach people to not binge eat.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Can your techniques be used with anything besides binge eating?
Yeah, it can be used with anything that has where you can create a very specific rule that 10 people could observe you from the outside and determine that you are, whether you did it or you didn't. So for example, you could use it to stop procrastinating if you created a very specific behavior that represented not procrastinating. Like, I will not turn on my computer until I journal for 30 minutes, or I will not take an appointment until I have accomplished 10 pages of writing in the morning, or whatever your specific project happens to be. You can use it for things like sleep or exercise or certain financial disciplines, anywhere that you can define the healthy versus unhealthy behaviors that have a very black and white, bright line that separates healthy from unhealthy. You can do it. Where I don't want people to use it is for drugs or alcohol. And the reason I don't want people to use it for drugs or alcohol is, first of all, there's another guy who was part of my evolution, the guy Jack Trimpey from Rational Recovery, who really has been doing drugs and alcohol for 25 years, working with drug addicts and alcoholics for 25 years. And it's just far and above perfected the system for that. This is a different system, especially with regards to how you have to forgive yourself after a mistake. The use of drugs and alcohol, it's got some stronger moral implications that don't really permit the level of forgiveness that Never Binge Again does for food. If someone knows that they have an alcohol problem and they have a drink anyway and then wind up getting behind the wheel and killing someone, there's a moral implication of having that drink. The 12-step programs would tell you that it's not a moral issue, but how is it not a moral issue to have a drink and get behind the wheel? It is a moral issue.
Yeah.
And so I don't want them using Never Binge Again for that.
Gotcha. I understand.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It can be used for pornography. It can be used for gambling. It can be used for sex addiction. There are all types of things that Never Binge Again can be used for, just not drugs and alcohol.
Gotcha. Well, thanks. That was a good answer. I was wondering that, and I couldn't differentiate the reason why it wouldn't be best used or not suggested to be used for drugs or alcohol, and you clarified that quite well. Thank you.
It makes it, the ability to use it for other areas makes it a more viable economic practice for the coach, because after you take the thorn out of people's paw when they're eating, which usually only takes 6 to 10 sessions, it's a fairly fast-acting program. As a matter of fact, if you learn how to do the first session correctly, you can totally change someone's mindset in 45 minutes. That's one of the very attractive things about it.
Wow.
But then you can take them to work on their sleep or their exercise or their finances or their productivity, and you're taking more thorns out of their paw. And then we teach people how to do more ongoing coaching in a slightly less structured way for those clients that really want to keep leveraging the relationship. So yeah, we have that. You're borrowing my credibility when you do it. You can use the brand name once you're licensed with us, and you know,
but you're not going to give your credibility away for nothing. you gotta make sure the people are, let's say, pass the course or graduate or what is there a test?
The written test is intended to prevent people who want to rubber stamp. So it's an open book test, and you have 1 hour to do it, and you can take it repeatedly if you need to, but it's substantial so that you really do have to watch the lectures. The other parts of the test are more important, which is to present a session with a client to one of our master coaches or to me myself, and to write it up and talk about your findings and get approved for that. So that's how we maintain quality control. And you have to demonstrate that you have practiced the various modules with either other coaches or real clients.
Nice.
So we do protect the brand name, and it's not a school. We're legally not allowed to call it a school, but I come out of an academic tradition, and I want to have people moving forward with quality. So we're protecting the name both for me and for everyone else that's using it now.
Absolutely. Yes. Good idea. Okay, Glenn, thank you. Anybody who's interested in more things that we spoke about in this episode, I'm going to have the addiction myths listed on my show notes page, as well as information on how you too can become a Never Binge Again coach, or should you just want to be a client. You can find all of that information on Live Fit Podcast, episode 135, at livefitpodcast.com. Look for episode 135.
And for a free copy of the Never Binge Again book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF formats, as well as a free set of recorded demonstration sessions, please visit bingenomore.com. That's bingenomore.com. After downloading the book, you'll also see how to become a trained and certified Never Binge Again coach, licensed to use Dr. Livingston's methodology, and provided with 2 years of live supervision with Glenn himself for both your client work and your marketing. That's bingenomore.com, bingenomore.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Live Fit podcast. I'll talk to you next time.
Perfect. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.